Okay, here we are at the final video in the coding of Canon 2. This video titled Phase 6 HUD. Sounds so scary. Nah, not really. In the last video, if you guys recall, we created the HUD item class. Now that we have the class created, let's go ahead and use it. Let's create some objects of that type. Now, we're going to need to create a title screen and a lives display, get them hooked up so that we have an indication that we need to click the mouse button to start the game, and then while we're playing the game, we can see our lives tick away, and when we run out of lives, we see the title screen again. Now, once we get that all wrapped up, and maybe a little cleanup here and there, Canon 2 is going to be done. It is going to comply with the requirements of the Canon game, and that's what we're looking to do. So with that, let me pull out my trusty implementation plan, and here's what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to start out first by creating the title screen object. We'll go ahead and get that set up, we'll get it positioned, and we'll set its dimensions. If you think back to the HUD item class, of course you know it contains position, but we also had a width and a height in there, which was responsible for setting the width and the height of the picture box. So we'll have to set up those dimensions, something different than what we had available to us in game item. We didn't have to treat game items that way. Also, we need to load the graphical content. In other words, get the title screen PNG file loaded into the picture box. Once that's done, we'll need to set up the draw scene to check for if the game is running. Because if the game is running, we don't want to draw the title screen. It wouldn't make sense to have your title screen over your player, your projectile, and your target. You wouldn't be able to see the action as it's taking place. So we'll need to set up some very simple logic to make sure that we're not showing the title screen when it doesn't need to be shown. From there, we're going to see a little bit of a flickering problem that gets introduced. So we'll need to clean that up. Once that's cleaned up, we then get to move over to our lives display. So we'll go ahead and create our lives display object, get it initialized, and once again, we'll simply load the graphical content. We need to get its dimensions set up and it positioned. And with getting it positioned, we're going to need to introduce a new constant, which is going to be the lives display offset, which is going to allow us to offset the graphic from the top left of our playing screen. That'll make a lot more sense when we actually get to it. From there, of course, make sure we get the graphic loaded into the picture box, and then once again set up draw scene to check for is the game running, because if we're looking at a title screen because the game's not running, we don't want to see how many players we have because we don't have any players because the game is not running. And then finally, we're going to need to get the display lives method that you guys wrote back in Canon 1, and we'll move it on over here. We'll rename it to update lives display so that it fits into what we're setting up. And that'll pretty much wrap up the game. So with that, Logan, let me go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, let's jump into our main game code. And from here, let's go all the way back up to the top where we were defining variables. And let's define a variable for the title screen HUD item. This is, of course, going to be a HUD item, and it's called title screen.
Okay.
All right, now we need to get this created, so we'll jump to initialize, which should be up under engine methods. And there we have, actually up a few, right after we've created our game items. Let's jump down a few lines, and then let's set up our title screen. So title screen is equal to new HUD item. Now, we do need to address a few more things. Like you were saying, we need to worry about this thing's position, because all of our other game items had relevant game mechanics that handled positioning them.
Exactly.
The title screen is something that we ourselves more or less have to position, because its job is just to stand there and be visible, more or less.
Okay.
So we need to turn around now and set a position, a width, and a height for the title screen. So we'll take our title screen, we'll set its position to be equal to a new point. Where do we want to position the title screen? Well, it's supposed to cover the entire screen. That means we need the top left corner at 0, 0, and then we'll worry about width and height in just a second. So the point will be at 0, 0. Now, for the width and height, well, again, we want the title screen to cover the entire screen, so we'll set the width to our screen width, and the height to our screen height. And this should have the title screen positioned at the top left corner and then covering the entire screen.
Fantastic.
All right, now we've got a title screen created. Now we need to get the graphic itself loaded into the title screen picture box. So I'm going to jump down to Load Graphics Content, and then we'll address the title screen picture box, and we'll tell it to load in the graphic title screen.png. And now we need to turn around and associate that with the title screen HUD item. So we'll take our title screen, we'll set its texture to be the title screen picture box, and that should have our association ready to go. And really all we should have left now is to draw the title screen. So let me jump down, we'll jump past update since we're not moving it, and we'll jump into draw scene. Now like you're saying, we need to add a check in here, we need to add some logic because we want to have the title screen drawn only when the game is not playing. So let me start an if statement where we can check our isGameRunning variable. And if the game is running, then we need to do things like draw the player, the target, and the projectile. If it is not running, that's where we want to go and draw the title screen. So we'll take our title screen and we'll tell it to draw.
Now this may look a little bit inefficient to you guys. Think about the logic here. Draw scene. It's being called, what, 60 times a second, Logan?
Right, that's what the timer sets to right now.
So 60 times a second, we're basically positioning our title screen to the upper left-hand corner, right?
Right.
Yeah, is that really necessary? No, in a Windows application it's not necessary because once you have placed a control in a particular location, that's it. It's not going to move unless you have some code to make it move around. Why are we doing this? Well, we are setting things up to look very similar to how it's going to look over in XNA. See, when we're in the world of XNA, we will be redrawing the screen 60 times a second, or however many times a second we specify. The key thing to understand is we will be redrawing the screen every single frame, meaning that if you have, let's say, a player that's running around a screen that he just freezes and stands still, he will still get drawn every single frame. So we're just setting up a situation here that's going to mimic what we're going to be doing over in XNA, because in the end, this class is not about how to design efficient games using WinForms. It's about how to create great XNA games, right, Logan?
Exactly. So we're not going to worry about the specifics of optimizing this for being a Windows control.
That's right.
But with this now, I believe, looking at the implementation plan, that it should be ready to build. And
yeah, we might see a little flicker, but let's try it out.
All right. So can we build?
Hey.
We can. Let's run. And there we go, a title screen.
Very
and
nice.
So let's click and make sure the title screen goes away. And it does not.
Aha, why?
Well, this goes back to what you were just talking about, the fact that we're not actually redrawing the screen every frame. So that means if we don't tell the title screen to go away, it's just going to stay there.
Exactly.
So this is a case where we will have to tweak just a little bit for WinForms. I'm going to scroll down to Begin Game, and if you remember, when we copied this from Canon 1, we had the line of code where we were hiding the title screen. We actually need to bring that back now. So I'm going to uncomment this, and this is now called, what, the title screen picture box? So we need to address the control itself. Just this, again, just being a special case tweak for the WinForms control version.
So when the game begins, again, just take a look at the logic. When the game begins, we hide it, and when the game ends, we show it again.
So now if we run, of course, we're still seeing it, and when we begin the game, it gets hidden, and it goes away.
Very nice.
And let me end off by losing.
And dead.
And it comes back.
Excellent.
Now, this doesn't mean that the draw itself is unnecessary. We do have to have the draw. If I comment off the draw, we never get a position. So we have to draw it at least once. So draw is still completely relevant in this case.
Exactly. All right, very good. Now, did we see that flicker there? Let's take a quick look.
Let me run a few times and take a look at that. What we're looking for is in the top left corner that it looked like there was a little bit of a flicker.
There was. If you go ahead and do it again. Yep, it's there. You can see it. You guys may not because, of course, we are recording at 10 frames per second, so you might not be able to see it. But if you're following along with us and you're creating your own Canon 2, run it a few times. Take a look in the upper left-hand corner. You will see those objects up there flicker for just one frame.
Right, and there's one specific I'm actually looking at right here, and that is the fact that the player is just sitting at 0, after being created.
Right.
And nothing is updating it until, like, the draw happens, and then we go back and update all the objects again. Basically, what I'm talking about is things like, after begin game, we reset the projectile, so we set its position to off-screen. We reset the target. We set its position off-screen. What do we do about the player? Nothing. We leave him at 0.
Right.
So we can correct the player's flicker by doing a quick call to update player. Update player. And what this will do, of course, it's not setting it off screen, but it is setting it to the bottom of the screen where the mouse is. So that way when the game begins, it makes sense. Like, oh, right. The player's already in the right place.
Exactly.
So now if I do a test on our end, we'll look, and we don't see any flicker in the corner because the player is already at the bottom of the screen where it's supposed to be.
Okay. Now you may see a little bit of other flicker as well. And this is very easy to fix. Basically, we've got our controls where they're positioned right now. We could move them out of the way of the playing area. Once again, we're dealing with a WinForm application, so we have already got controls positioned on the screen. And if you recall how initialize and the load graphics content work, we already have everything set up and the graphics loaded into those picture boxes. So this may give you just a very quick momentary flicker of these particular items. So we could create a simple fix that will get rid of that flicker problem. Again, when we get over into XNA, it's not going to work like this because it's not like we have a designer and we can go throw picture boxes down. It's a whole different world. So if we just jump over to the designer real quick, we could just stretch it way out.
So stretch is wider, though. I'm sure this isn't exactly wider than the real one because we're working on a small screen to record with.
But I think everybody will get the idea. And it would just push it all the way away. As a matter of fact, push them even further off where you just, exactly. I don't mind just because we're not coming back to them anyways. So the idea is just to get them out of the way. Let's go ahead and execute. And much better. Yeah, you don't see them flicker right there. So, of course, if you guys love your WinForm Canon 2 game, I don't understand why. It's a stepping tool, basically getting us over to XNA. But if you love it so much and you don't want to see the flicker, just move your picture boxes out of your playing area, and all will be good. Okay?
Right. We didn't even address that one through code because, like you were saying, we're not going to run into that problem like that in XNA when we're in control of drawing and when things draw.
Right.
I did address the player flicker through code because in the way that the order in which everything runs, that will actually be a visible flicker in XNA.
Right.
So I addressed this one with the player positioning through code.
Okay, very good. So now that we've got that part of the implementation plan knocked out, the next thing, Logan, is to create our lives display.
All right. Well, back to variables because we need to define a variable to reference it. So back to HUD item. We'll make another HUD item variable, this one called lives display. And we've got lives display. Now we need to go, of course, to initialize to create it. So we'll jump down to initialize, jump below where we had our title screen, and create our lives display, where lives display is equal to a new HUD item. Alright, now just like the title screen, we need to position lives display. But think about this one for a second. In Canon 1, we purposefully put the lives display up in the top left corner, but offset a little. We set it to an offset of 4x4 pixels.
That's right. We didn't set it to 0, 0, or it was snugged all the way tight up to the upper left-hand corner of your playing screen area. It just wouldn't look good. So we need to make sure we have the same offset taking place here.
Right, we want a specific numerical offset. But see, here's the thing. If we just hard-code that in, then we'll have hard-coded values nestled deep within the code.
Not good.
And it would be harder to change. It would be harder to find if we weren't familiar with the code.
Oh, it's magic numbers. You don't want to have magic numbers in your code.
Right. So let's define a constant so that if we ever wanted to change it, it would be easy to find and easy to change. So I'm going to jump back up to where we have all of our constants and define one right below the lives title width. So this will be a constant. It will be an integer, and it will be called lives. Let's see, lives display. If I can type.
Display offset.
Lives display offset. And since we're keeping with the current look, we'll set this to 4, so that it'll be just like Canon 1.
And we only need one of these lives display offset because we're offsetting both our top and our left by 4 pixels. Now, of course, let's say your left was going to be set over to 4, but your top needed to be set to 8. Then you'd want to go ahead and set up 2 different variables here.
Right, but in order to satisfy the requirements of Canon 1, one variable is just fine.
Absolutely.
And let me scroll down, back to initialize. Actually, I scrolled past initialize. Here we go, lives display. Now we have a value that we can use for positioning. So let's set up the lives display's position. We need to set this to be, of course, a new point, so we can give the individual values. And those values are lives display offset by lives display offset.
Perfect.
Alright, so we've got our positioning. Now we need to worry about setting up our width and height. Now, we need to set that, basically we've already defined the tile width, so let me go back and look at the constants for a second, just to show where I'm going to get some values from. We need to set up the width, and we can figure out the width because we know the width of each tile. Each life tile is 16 pixels wide. If we want to show the starting lives, we need to show 3 of the tiles, but of course we have that value sitting there. So by using the lives tile width and the starting lives, we have our width. We also have our height because we can use just one tile width for the
Since
the
it's
height.
16 by 16. That's right.
So let's put that into play for width and height. So back to initialize, let's address width. Take lives display, we'll set its width to be equal to our lives tile width times however many lives we start out with, which is of course held in starting lives. It takes care of width. Now let's address height. So we'll have lives display dot height. We'll set that to 1 tile, or lives tile width. Alright, that should have positioning. Now all we need to do is have this draw in our draw scene. So we'll go down to draw scene. Now when do we want this to draw? When the game is running or when it's not running? Well, it's a relevant HUD item as you're playing the game.
Right.
So this goes in the section for when the game is running. So we'll jump in right below where we draw the projectile, then call upon our lives display and tell it to draw. So now I believe, let's see. Oh, actually I skipped over one. Back in
loading the graphical content.
Yeah, we need to get because we're not actually putting a image in the picture box. So let's address that. Let's take our lives display picture box. Let's have it load in the graphic lives.png. And then, of course, we need to set up the association with lives display. So we'll set the lives display's texture to be the lives display picture box. And now I think that's everything. We've got the content loading, we've got some positioning, and we're drawing an update scene. So if I build, I can build, and if I run and begin, there we go. We see the lives display properly drawn and offset by 4 pixels up in the corner. But notice what's happening. We're not displaying the lives with it.
That's right.
Because we're never updating it. So we need to have a method that will handle changing the lives display item and changing its width. So I'm going to jump down to our gameplay methods, and I'm going to jump all the way to the bottom right after kill target. And
Are you going to write this, or can we borrow it from Canon 1?
I'm going to skeleton in the method,
Fair.
but then I'm going to steal the code.
Okay.
Because the code works basically exactly the same as it did in Canon 1.
Okay.
I'm going to skeleton in, though, because I'm changing the name of the method. I want a method that represents exactly what's happening.
Okay.
And what's going to happen is that we're going to update that lives display HUD item. So let's lay that method down. This will be a private void method called update lives display. Because in this case, it's not like we're waiting until now to show any lives. We've been showing lives. We've been showing 3. But in the case that it changes, then we need to update the lives display to show the new number. But the code for that is basically going to be exactly the same as Canon 1, so I'm going to bring Canon 1 up. Instead of Canon 1, I'm looking at the gameplay methods, and I'm going to scroll down to where we have, just after kill target, we had a display lives. And I'm going to steal this line of code. And then I'm going to jump back to our new one and paste that in. And the only change here is the fact that lives display is now a HUD item, and it now begins with a lowercase letter. And that should take care of it. So we're just taking our current lives and multiplying that by each tile width, so we get a width in tiles. And that's it for the method. Now we need to go through and find all the places where we were before calling display lives, and instead call update lives display. So let me actually copy in the name update lives display, and let's focus on begin and end game to start out with. I'll uncomment display lives and then paste in a call to update lives display. Then I'll move down from begin game to kill player.
Okay. Thought you were leaving that method for just you uncommented, then you left. I was like, wait a minute, where are you going?
And let me take a quick peek at mechanics just to make sure that there's nothing in here. I think that's good though, because think about it. I mean,
it's when it's when the player gets killed basically that you need to take lives away.
Begin game to reset it, and then every time the player is killed to take it away.
Right.
So let's build, make sure that everything is happy, and then we should be able to play and try it out. So there we go, 3 lives, die 2 lives, die again 1 life, die, and everything goes back. And let's make sure that everything is still working. So I'll begin the game again, and we go back to 3 lives like we're supposed to.
Okay, beautiful. Now go and start the game one more time and play it. Actually, play it for real. Play it for real. Let's get them faster. Good.
I see. You want to check the lives value, make sure that that's still in place.
Very good.
And it does seem to be getting faster.
Up. Must be quiet. Up.
And there we go.
And there he goes. All right, fantastic. So at this point, Logan, I think that's everything we needed to get in place so that this game conforms to the requirements set forth for the Canon game.
And the only thing I can think of tweaking-wise is we could throw in a called the hide the cursor.
Yeah, you could do the hide the cursor, but let's not. Did you want to throw that in?
Sure, why not?
If you want to.
Make it look one step more like XNA. All I'm going to do for this is jump into the constructor and call cursor.hide. So, .hide. Now, of course, this does differ a little bit from Canon 1 where we hid and then re-showed the cursor. But I've almost kind of changed my mind on that. I like the idea of it. If we're going to hide it, just keep it hidden for just the duration of the game, the duration of the app running. And so that takes care of cursor. Did you want to play around with the timers for a second, just to show the rendering rate?
Sure. Actually, I would like to point out one more thing. If you go ahead and hit play real quick. Now, take a look at this, guys. There is one big difference between Canon 1 and Canon 2, and I'm not really worried about this, Logan. I just wanted to point it out. Everybody knows how to change this. But we do have the ability to maximize our window. And we also, and there's our controls, very nice. And we also have the ability to resize our window as well.
Just a second to get that. The cursor hide thing had.
So I just wanted to point that out, though, that we do have maximize and resize in place.
The rest of the tweaks are just like you said, they're exactly or done the same way as in Canon 1.
Precisely. So. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about how we've decoupled the updating of the game and the drawing of the game.
Right. Back when we were designing the form, we made 2 different timers, but we never really addressed what would happen if you changed the values or changed the interval of either one. We talked about decoupling being a good idea so that we could change the render speed without affecting the speed of our game items. So let's actually show that. Let's show what would happen if we took the update timer and changed it. Like, let's say for whatever reason, we just suddenly decided we wanted the game to run at 30 frames a second instead of 60. So if I change the interval to 33, that will indeed cause draw to be called at 33 frames a second.
Wait. On update?
Well, see, here's what I'm showing. If we were on update.
Oh, okay.
Let me show you what would happen.
I see what you're saying.
We've got kind of an idea of how fast everything moves. Let me show how fast the game items themselves move. So if we run, we notice 2 things. One, at least on our end, the game actually looks choppier. Yeah. But look at the speed of everything. Everything's moving at half speed now. So if we wanted to change the render rate but not affect the speed of the items, that's why we decouple the timers. We know that we need to leave our update timer at 60 frames a second. That's just the way the game has been designed. We don't have time compensation in place. So the update timer stays at 60 frames a second. Our draw timer, however, can be set to whatever we want. We could set our draw timer to 33 frames a second, and look at that. The actual speed is the same, even though the drawing is choppier. So that way we have control over the draw speed completely separate from the speed at which our game items update. All right?
All right, very cool. Now, of course, at this point, you guys should know how to show and hide the cursor. So while Logan and I's idea of that differ just a little bit, because I think it's hard when the game ends and you don't have your mouse and you're like, where am I at? You guys can go ahead and put in the appropriate show and hide in the correct areas. So just think about the logic. Give that as take that as a bit of a challenge. Very easy to do. Logan's just once again gearing up for XNA, where we're going to handle things slightly differently. But at this point, I think that's everything we need. The game does indeed conform to the requirements set forth by Canon, the game itself, and we followed our game specs. We've looked at the implementation plan, followed it step by step all the way through to the end, and that's it. Canon 2 is now complete. So we are finally ready to graduate away from WinForm applications and move over into the wonderful world of XNA. Okay, so with that, that is going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.